imagine, like, you are a woman living in the ancient Near East. Your husband has just died.
Right. A terrible situation right off the bat.
Yeah, and then a few years later, both of your adult sons die too.
Oh, man.
You have 0 remaining male heirs, which, I mean, according to the laws of the time, that means you have no property, you have absolutely no legal standing, and basically no social security at all.
You're completely invisible.
Literally invisible to the law. You are standing on the very brink of, like, historical erasure. You're facing a life of begging or honestly worse.
Yeah.
So what do you do? Like, who steps in to save you?
It's just a terrifying scenario to even put yourself in. And I think it immediately shatters the way we usually think about being, saved or redeemed.
Right, yeah.
Because today, redemption is, well, it's often treated as this inward feeling, right? Like a private spiritual transaction, just a sense of emotional relief.
Exactly. We tend to view redemption through this really sentimental, almost, I don't know, Hollywood lens.
Oh, absolutely. Like the swelling music in the background.
Yeah. Yes. The dramatic but very clean rescue. It's just this feeling of being saved from a bad situation, and then everyone walks away smiling into the sunset.
Right.
But this scenario I just described, that isn't a movie plot. It was a brutal, gritty, historical reality. So welcome to the deep dive. If you are joining us today, you are probably here because you want to cut through the noise,
Yeah, get past the surface level stuff.
Exactly. You want to avoid the information overload and really grasp the multidimensional, sometimes actually shocking truths behind concepts that we think we already know.
We think we know them, but we really don't.
So true. And today we have an incredible stack of sources in front of us. We're looking at these detailed texts and some really brilliant structural infographics by Chris Arvelasis.
They're so well put together.
They really are. And all of this material is centering on a very short, deceptively quiet story. The Book of Ruth.
Yeah, and it's a brilliant collection of material because it absolutely refuses to let us read Ruth as just, a touching Sunday school story.
Which is how it's usually taught.
Exactly. It pushes us to see it as this profound structural blueprint for how the world is actually put back together when it completely falls apart.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today is to uncover how this small, seemingly pastoral narrative actually defines the entire concept of redemption.
And it does. It really does.
Yep, it does. And as we dig into the historical context that's provided in our sources, it becomes super clear that true redemption is incredibly gritty. Like, it involves bloodlines, real estate, intense legal obligation.
And deeply costly sacrifice.
Yes, exactly. It introduces this vital legal and moral framework known in Hebrew as the Goel, the kinsman-redeemer.
And to really understand the beauty and, honestly, the immense weight of this kind of redemption,
Right.
we first have to understand the absolute devastation and the societal chaos that serves as its backdrop.
Right.
Because you cannot appreciate the architecture of the rescue if you don't understand the depth of the peril they were in.
So true. I mean, the story of Ruth doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It opens with this very specific, ominous time marker, right? It says it happened in the days when the judges ruled.
Yeah, that phrase alone carries so much baggage.
It really does. And we are told there's a famine in the land. Now, if you know the history of ancient Israel, you know that this era, the era of the judges, is not just incidental background noise.
Not at all.
It is a politically and morally terrifying time to be alive.
Terrifying is the right word. The era of the judges is characterized in the historical record by spiritual decay, civil war, and just deep, deep political fragmentation.
Like total instability.
Completely. There was no king, no centralized government at all. The defining refrain of that era, which, the author of Judges actually repeats multiple times to drive the point home, is that everyone did what was right in his own eyes.
Which is just a recipe for disaster.
It is a time of complete moral anarchy. And yet, the fascinating thing is that God is working through these incredibly imperfect, often deeply flawed leaders to deliver his people from various regional threats.
Right. And our sources actually list out some of these judges to highlight just how chaotic the leadership was. And I think we really need to look at this because it sets up the contrast that we are going to see later with Boaz.
Oh, the contrast is staggering.
It is. Like, we often remember the Sunday school highlights of these figures, but their actual tenures were so messy. I mean, look at Ehud.
Oh, yeah, Ehud.
He's this unlikely left-handed deliverer who performed a very, how do I say this, a very graphic, localized political assassination to save Israel from Moab.
Right. He sneaks his sword in, and yeah, it's quite graphic.
It's not a clean rescue mission.
No. And then there's Deborah. She's leading and judging in this fiercely patriarchal society. The cultural expectation was absolutely that only men would lead.
Right.
But she steps into this massive leadership vacuum because the men, frankly, are just too paralyzed by fear to do it.
Yeah, they literally won't go to battle without her. And then we have Gideon. We always think of him as this great hero of faith, right?
Right, the guy with the fleece.
Exactly. But if you look at the text, his primary characteristic for most of his story is just crippling insecurity.
Oh, completely.
He is fearful. He's hiding in a wine press when an angel finds him. He is constantly asking God for signs and fleeces because he just doesn't trust the plan.
He needs constant reassurance.
Uh-huh.
And then we see Jephthah.
Oh, man, Jephthah's story is rough.
It really is. He's a social outcast, the son of a prostitute, and he ends up making this deeply tragic, impulsive vow that basically costs him his own daughter.
Just a horrific outcome.
And then, of course, we have Samson.
Right, Samson. I mean, he is arguably the most famous judge, but if we are honest about the political consequences of his life, his leadership is a disaster.
An absolute disaster.
He is entirely driven by impulsivity, this weakness for women, and just immense pride. He never actually rallies the nation or, builds any sort of coalition.
No, he just operates as a rogue agent.
Rogue agent, causing total chaos. And the Philistines just continue to dominate the region because Israel, under Samson, has zero cohesive leadership.
Exactly. So you have this incredibly unstable, decentralized foundation across the whole nation. Society is fractured. The tribes are often literally fighting each other in civil wars.
Right.
The leaders are flawed, acting out of fear, pride, revenge, whatever. And in the middle of this massive macro-political vacuum, a micro-agrarian crisis hits the little town of Bethlehem.
A severe famine.
A severe famine. And this sets up a massive contrast. We are going to see this chaotic, self-serving leadership of the judges directly contrasted with the character of Boaz later on. But first, we really have to look at the collateral damage of this societal collapse.
Yeah, let's zoom in on one specific family caught in this. The family of Elimelech and Naomi. They are living in Bethlehem. And there's a deep irony here because the name Bethlehem literally translates to house of bread.
Right, but there is no bread.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
famine is so severe that it drives them to migrate. They flee Bethlehem and settle in the neighboring region of Moab.
Which is a really desperate move. Moab wasn't just, a friendly neighboring country. They were historical enemies of Israel, born out of a deeply fraught history.
Yeah, they were not on good terms.
Moving there meant leaving the covenant community, leaving the land that God had promised to their ancestors, and seeking refuge among a people who worshiped completely different gods.
It's an act of total desperation, and there's a survival strategy. It completely backfires. It's just a cascade of tragedy from there.
It just gets worse and worse.
Right. Elimelech, the patriarch, dies. So Naomi is left in this foreign land with her two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. These sons marry Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. But then, and this is just heartbreaking, about 10 years later, both of those sons die.
Yeah.
So now you have three widows in a foreign land. Naomi has lost her husband, she's lost her sons, her means of provision, and any hope for a future bloodline. She is completely stripped bare.
We really need to pause here and emphasize just how vulnerable a widow was in the ancient Near East.
It's hard for us to grasp today.
It is, because this wasn't just an emotional loss. I mean, of course it was that. But it was a total economic and legal catastrophe. Without a husband or sons, she has no advocate in the courts.
Right.
She has no provider for food and no legal standing to protect whatever meager property she might have back home. She is entirely dependent on charity in a world that wasn't exactly known for its robust social safety nets.
Not at all. And there is this devastating but incredibly realistic quote from Naomi when she finally hears there is food back in Bethlehem, and she decides to make that long journey home.
Oh, this quote just hits so hard.
It really does. She arrives, the town is buzzing, everyone is like, is this Naomi? And she says to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty.
It's such a profound, agonizing statement. And our source text provides this brilliant analysis of this exact moment. It says her words are not theological rebellion so much as wounded interpretation.
Wounded interpretation. I love that phrasing because it captures the psychology of grief so perfectly.
It really does, right?
Mhm.
She isn't shaking her fist at the heavens and just abandoning her faith in pure rebellion. She is looking at the brutal reality of her life, and she's interpreting God's actions through her deep, agonizing wounds.
Yeah, she sees the emptiness. She feels the absolute void of her loss.
Exactly, and she attributes it to God's sovereignty, which, ironically, is actually a sign of faith, but it's a very bitter faith.
Mm.
What she does not see, and cannot yet see, is the hidden mercy that God is already orchestrating just out of her view.
She is completely focused on the emptiness, but walking right beside her, quite literally, is the seed of her future fullness. And that brings us to Ruth.
Yes.
Ruth is a Moabite widow. Now, by all cultural, economic, and practical logic, she should stay in Moab. She should return to her father's house, find a new husband among her own people, and secure her own survival.
Which is exactly what Naomi tells her to do.
Right. Naomi practically begs her daughters-in-law to leave her because she knows she has absolutely nothing to offer them.
Yeah, she's like, I have no more sons to give you, just go back.
Yeah.
And Orpah eventually makes the logical choice and goes back. But Ruth exhibits this radical, almost inexplicable loyalty.
It makes no sense on paper.
None. She makes a choice that involves leaving everything, her homeland, her ethnic identity, her family, and her pagan worship, just to follow Naomi back to a land where she's going to be despised as a foreigner.
And there's that famous quote, Ruth 1.16, which our sources highlight as the true turning point of the narrative. Ruth says, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God."
It's so beautiful.
It is. We hear that at weddings all the time today, which is lovely. But as our sources point out in its original context, this is not just a nice declaration of friendship or romance.
Not at all. It is a radical, incredibly costly conversion. She is actively binding her fate to an older, bitter, impoverished widow who has explicitly said, I have no future.
Yeah.
From a purely economic and survival standpoint, Ruth's decision is basically suicide. It is geopolitical treason to her own people, and it's economic ruin for herself.
So we have these two highly vulnerable women, one bitter and empty, one fiercely loyal but foreign, and they are walking back into Bethlehem together. They are entering a chaotic, patriarchal society during the era of the Judges.
A terrible time to be vulnerable.
Exactly. As our source notes, they are on the brink of historical erasure. If their family line ends, Elimelech's name just vanishes from Israel's memory. So how do they survive? Like, they can't just apply for a government grant or go to a bank and start a business.
Right. This is where the narrative brilliantly shifts. It connects the deeply personal tragedy of these two women to the broader structural safety net that God had built into Israel's ancient covenant law. Their survival and their ultimate restoration hinges entirely on a specific legal concept that was designed precisely for moments of total systemic failure like this one.
The architecture of the Goel, the kinsman-redeemer.
Exactly. The Hebrew word goel refers to a near relative who has the legal right and the moral duty to step in and protect vulnerable kin.
It's essentially an institutionalized family protector.
Yes. Now, our sources unpack two specific Old Testament laws that converge to create this role. And I think this is where a modern listener really has to shift their paradigm because it ties biology, property, and spiritual legacy all together into one very tight knot.
It really does. Let's look at the first law, which is found in Leviticus 25. This deals with the redemption of land.
Right.
In ancient Israel, land wasn't just a financial asset that you bought and sold on the open market like real estate today. The land was tied to the family's covenant identity. It was their specific inheritance from God, allotted to their tribe and clan.
It was considered a permanent divine lease.
Right, you couldn't just sell it off forever to the highest bidder to make a profit. But what happened if a family fell into severe poverty, like Elimelech's family during the famine, and they had to mortgage or sell their land just to buy food?
That's exactly what Leviticus 25 addresses. If a family became destitute and sold their property, a near relative, a goel, had the legal right to step in, pay the debt, and buy the land back.
Okay.
But here's the key. He wasn't buying it for his own real estate portfolio. He was buying it back for the impoverished family member so that the land stayed within its original God-given bloodline.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was this ancient socioeconomic mechanism designed to prevent systemic poverty and to stop the consolidation of land by just a few wealthy elites.
Okay, so that covers the real estate economic side. It's a way of keeping the tribal allotments intact. But there is a second law that comes into play here, and this one is even more foreign to our modern
Oh
ears.
yeah, definitely. That is the law of the levirate marriage, found in Deuteronomy 25. Basically, if a man died without leaving a male heir, his name and his lineage were in danger of being completely wiped out. To prevent this, his brother, or his nearest relative, had a moral duty to marry the widow.
Wait. Let's really break this down, because I can hear the modern listener just cringing right now.
Oh, for sure.
If my brother dies, I have to marry his widow. And and the first son born to us doesn't legally count as my son. He carries on the name and the inheritance of my dead brother.
That is exactly how it worked. The first son born to the new union would be legally considered the heir of the deceased husband. It preserved his family line and ensured that the inherited land stayed with that specific name.
So it's essentially an ancient socioeconomic insurance policy. It's like a biological trust fund.
Yes.
It ensures that a widow isn't just tossed out onto the street when her husband dies, and it ensures that a man's legacy isn't erased just because he died young.
That's a really great way to think about it. The goal combines these two massive responsibilities. Our infographic actually calls it a triangle of redemption. It perfectly combines relationship and responsibility. You have to be closely related, which gives you the legal right to act, but you also bear the incredibly heavy responsibility of financial provision and biological continuation.
But I have to push back here for a second. We are talking about redemption, which for most people is a deeply spiritual, almost ethereal concept.
Right.
Why tie a spiritual idea so closely to real estate, to agrarian economics, and to biological reproduction? Doesn't that make the whole concept of redemption feel incredibly transactional, like it's just a legal loophole or a complex business deal?
This raises an important question, and it's one the sources address directly.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have this tendency, especially today, to split the world into two categories.
Mm-hmm.
We think the spiritual is clean and holy, and the physical is dirty and transactional.
Mm-hmm.
But the biblical worldview just doesn't do that.
Yeah.
In the Bible, redemption is not just a spiritual idea floating in the clouds. It is, as the text calls it, embodied grace.
Embodied grace. I like the sound of that, but what does it actually mean in practice, like on the ground?
It means that the material world really matters to God. Land, in the Old Testament, equals covenant identity. It is the physical, material expression of belonging to God's people.
Right.
Losing your land didn't just mean you were poor. It meant losing your visible place in God's promises. So by tying redemption to dirt, to property, and to lineage, the biblical law proves that God cares deeply about physical, economic, and historical realities, not just spiritual ones.
Wow.
The body matters. The dirt matters. Who owns the farm matters. Future generations matter.
That is a massive paradigm shift. It grounds redemption in absolute reality. It means redemption isn't just about making someone feel better about their trauma emotionally. It's about them being materially, socially, and legally restored.
Exactly.
It's a total holistic reclamation project. And I think that brings us to the man who embodies this role perfectly. Section 3 of our deep dive. Boaz and the moral shape of redemption.
Yes, enter Boaz. The narrative introduces him as a prominent relative of Elimelech, which immediately flags him for the reader as a potential Goel.
Right, the reader's like, oh, here's the guy.
Exactly. But he isn't just defined by his bloodline. He is described as a man of wealth, of high social standing, and most importantly, of profound moral integrity.
And the sources ask us to look closely at how he is introduced, because it's such a subtle detail. But it speaks volumes. He walks into his field during the barley harvest, and the very first thing he says to his laborers is, "The Lord be with you."
It reveals everything about his character and his management style. Because remember the context we just discussed, the era of the judges.
Right, total chaos.
A social world shaped by selfish chaos, where everyone does what is right in their own eyes, where leaders constantly exploit the weak. In that environment, Boaz operates completely differently. That simple greeting shows a workplace, an economy shaped by reverence and mutual respect.
And the text introduces this beautiful Hebrew concept here, hesed, steadfast love, covenant loyal love in action.
Hesed is arguably one of the most important theological words in the entire Old Testament. It's often translated in our English Bibles as kindness or loyalty. But honestly, those English words are almost too weak to carry the actual weight of the Hebrew. Hesed is reliable, incredibly costly action taken for the absolute good of another person, rooted in a deep commitment to God.
It's heavy.
Very. It is never just a vague feeling of niceness or pity.
I look at Boaz, and I can't help but compare him to modern concepts of corporate leadership. Think about it. He has all this power, all this wealth, and he has these vulnerable, desperate people working in his fields. But he doesn't use his power to extract maximum value from the wheat.
No, not at all.
He doesn't act like a modern CEO who cuts worker benefits just to boost his own bonus. And when he notices Ruth gleaning in his field, he doesn't help her just for a PR win or like to look like a philanthropist to the city elders.
Yeah.
He uses his strength as a literal, tangible shield.
Exactly. I mean, the law stated that farmers were supposed to leave the edges of their fields unharvested for the poor and the foreigner to glean. But many farmers during the time of the judges likely just ignored this to maximize profits.
Because who's going to stop them, right?
Right. But Boaz not only obeys the law, he goes above and beyond. He commands his workers to deliberately pull stalks out of the bundles and leave them behind for her.
Wow.
He ensures she can glean safely, protecting her from the physical harassment or exploitation that a young foreign widow would almost certainly face. He invites her to eat with his workers. He embodies his guards. He leverages his privilege for her protection.
And this all builds to the absolute climax of the story, the legal transaction at the city gate in Ruth chapter 4. Naomi realizes Boaz is a redeemer. She instructs Ruth to approach him, and Boaz promises to handle it legally.
And the city gate in the ancient Near Eastern world was basically the courthouse, the city council, and the public square all rolled into one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you had a legal transaction or a dispute, you brought it to the elders at the gate. It was full public view.
So Boaz goes to the gate because he is a near relative, but there is a complication. There is actually someone closer in the family line, an unnamed near relative. Our sources just call him Mr. So-and-so. And this scene at the gate is a masterclass in legal maneuvering and human psychology. Boaz sits down with the elders, calls the nearer relative over, and presents the situation. He says, Naomi is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech.
And initially, the nearer relative is totally on board. He says, I will redeem it. He is more than willing to buy the land.
Okay.
Why? Because land is a solid financial asset.
Right.
It adds to his estate. It increases his own wealth.
But then Boaz drops the other shoe. He says essentially, oh, by the way, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance.
And instantly, the near relative backs out. He literally says, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself.
He just folds. Why? Wait, let's do the math on this because I think I'm realizing exactly why he backed out.
Let's hear it.
If he just buys the land from Naomi, who is past childbearing age, the land eventually reverts to him and his own sons permanently. But if he has to marry Ruth, who is young, they will likely have a son, and that son will legally be considered Elimelech's heir. So the near relative would be spending his own silver to buy land that his own biological sons wouldn't even keep.
You nailed it.
He'd be funding a trust for a rival branch of the family tree.
That is exactly the financial calculus he is running in his head. It would cost him his own inheritance, his own wealth, to elevate someone else's name. He is perfectly willing to make a financial investment that benefits himself.
But he won't make a sacrifice.
Exactly. He is entirely unwilling to make a sacrificial covenant that actually costs him something. He wants the asset. He absolutely does not want the obligation or the liability.
But Boaz willingly steps up. He formally acquires the right to redeem in public, witnessed by the elders. They do this ancient ceremony where the other guy takes off his sandal and hands it to Boaz to signify the transfer of the right.
Right, the sandal ceremony.
Boaz takes on the land, he takes on the foreign widow, he takes on the financial cost, and he takes on the heavy responsibility to raise up an heir, to carry on someone else's name.
It's a stunning contrast of character. And our sources emphasize that this isn't just a neat legal trick to give a sad story a happy ending. Boaz's actions at the gate establish the core theological and structural principles of what true biblical redemption actually requires.
Which brings us to the very heart of the analysis provided in our sources today, the 5 core principles of biblical redemption. The text lays these out systematically, and I want us to spend substantial time on each one, because this is where the blueprint of the Goel really comes together.
Let's do it. It's a brilliant framework.
Principle number 1, redemption is relational first. The sources emphasize that true redemption restores people, not just property.
This is a crucial distinction that separates the biblical model from a purely economic one. When Boaz acts, he isn't just acquiring a field to add to his acreage. He is bringing Naomi and Ruth back into communion. The nearer relative only saw the property, the land, the asset. Boaz saw the people. Redemption always includes both status and relationship. It brings the outcast back into the family fold.
It says right here in the text that redemption is not an abstract asset transfer. Boaz is redeeming a family name, a future line, and human lives. It's profoundly personal. If redemption is only about changing a legal status, it's cold. But Boaz changes their legal status so that he can bring them to his table.
Which naturally leads to principle number 2, and we saw this perfectly illustrated at the city gate. The Redeemer must be both qualified and willing.
Right. There's a massive gap between those two things. The unnamed relative had the right to redeem. He was legally qualified by his bloodline, but he lacked the readiness. He wasn't willing to take the hit.
Exactly. Boaz has both. And as the sources point out, this is a massive theological foreshadowing of how God operates. A true Redeemer must meet very specific criteria.
What kind of criteria?
Well, they must be close enough to the vulnerable to have the legal and relational right to act. They must be strong enough or wealthy enough to actually pay the price. And they must be internally willing to make the sacrifice.
Right.
Qualification without willingness is useless. It's just a guy sitting at the gate with his sandal.
Yeah.
But willingness without qualification is powerless. Ruth might have wanted to save Naomi, but she didn't have the legal or financial power to do it. You must have both.
Principle number 3, costly love. Here's where it gets really interesting. The sources state very clearly that redemption is never free. It always requires a literal sacrifice from the Redeemer.
There is no such thing as cheap grace in the biblical framework.
Yeah.
Boaz risks his own wealth, his own property, and the complications of his own future estate to bind himself to the absolute vulnerability of Naomi and Ruth.
Yeah.
He takes their poverty, their social disadvantage, and their foreigner status onto himself.
It's like he absorbs their debt. He absorbs their emptiness.
That is a beautiful way to phrase it. He absorbs their emptiness so that they can experience his fullness. It costs him dearly. True hesed, true loyal love always leaves a mark on the one giving it. It is an exchange, a substitution, not just a casual transaction.
Principle number 4, restores inheritance. The text says redemption gives back identity and future hope. It's the reversal of exile.
We talked earlier about how losing land meant risking your covenant identity and your place in the community. By restoring the inheritance, Boaz isn't just giving them a farm to work. He is giving them back their place in the ongoing story of God's people. He is ensuring they belong.
Redemption gives back what exile took. I keep thinking about Naomi. She went into this self-imposed exile to Moab because of the famine, and the physical famine turned into a relational and familial famine. She lost everything.
She did.
Redemption reverses that loss. It doesn't just put her back to neutral, it secures a flourishing future.
Which points directly to the 5th and final principle, which might be the most awe-inspiring part of the whole book: generational impact. Redemption is never just about solving the present crisis.
Exactly. Look at the very ending of the story.
Yeah.
Ruth and Boaz get married, and they have a son, Obed. The women of the town say to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age."
Such a turnaround from her Mara speech.
Completely. Obed brings immense joy to Naomi. He literally fills her empty arms. But the story doesn't stop there. The book ends with a genealogy. Obed becomes the father of Jesse, and Jesse becomes the father of King David.
The faithful, incredibly costly acts of Boaz and Ruth on a random Tuesday at a city gate literally shaped the legacy of tomorrow.
It's wild.
The restoration of one obscure, starving family in Bethlehem becomes the direct biological conduit for the greatest king in Israel's history.
It just shows the butterfly effect of moral integrity. It means that our choices, our quiet, uncelebrated acts of hesed in our own little spheres, have ripple effects that we cannot possibly comprehend in the moment. Faithful acts today shape legacies for tomorrow.
And, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the brilliance of the Book of Ruth truly shines, and where our sources push us into some really deep theological waters.
Let's go there.
They take us on this sweeping journey, showing how this small, seemingly quiet pastoral story maps flawlessly onto the entire grand narrative of the biblical timeline. It isn't just a story in the Bible, it is a microcosm of the Bible.
Let's trace that timeline, because when you see it laid out chronologically, it is mind-blowing. It starts in eternity to creation.
Right. The text points out that humans were made for communion and generational blessing from the very beginning in Genesis. The idea that one person can stand in for another, preserve a name, and restore an inheritance, that isn't a hasty patch for a broken legal system. It's rooted in how we were fundamentally created to be relational, interconnected beings. We were made to bear one another's burdens.
But then comes the fall. And our source notes that the story of Ruth is utterly impossible without a fallen, broken world.
Exactly. Death, systemic poverty, widowhood, famine, political corruption, these are all symptoms of a fractured creation, what theologians call the Adamic curse.
Right.
The story of Ruth doesn't pretend the world is fine. It enters into the absolute grit and grime of a fractured world. Naomi's emptiness, her bitterness, her loss of her sons, that is a direct result of living in a fallen world.
But God doesn't just leave his people in that fractured, desperate state. The next point on the timeline is covenant and redemption. God provides laws like the Gola, the kinsman-redeemer mechanism, to protect the vulnerable.
Because the law makes room for redemption, as God's people aren't supposed to live as isolated, self-serving individuals like the near relative wanted to do. The law's intense concern for the vulnerable, the widow, the poor, the foreigner, the orphan, is a direct reflection of God's holy character. The law was designed to catch people when they fell.
Then we move to kingdom and exile. As we mentioned, the genealogy at the end of Ruth points directly to David, establishing the line of righteous kingship.
But there is a deeper parallel here too. Naomi's personal journey, fleeing a famine, losing everything in Moab, becoming bitter, and returning empty, actually mirrors Israel's future national narrative.
Oh, wow. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, centuries later, the entire nation of Israel will experience exile to Babylon. They will experience devastating loss, displacement, and the feeling that God has totally abandoned them. But ultimately, God promises them an enriched restoration. Naomi is basically a prophetic picture of the entire nation.
Enriched restoration. That's the key. Not just barely scraping by, not just getting back to zero, but being given abundance. And all of this, every single point on this timeline, hurtles toward the ultimate focal point of the Christian narrative, the Messiah.
Yes. Jesus is presented in the New Testament as the ultimate kinsman-redeemer. The entire Goel pattern, all those ancient legal requirements in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, reach their cosmic climax in him.
Let's break that down because it perfectly mirrors Boaz, but on a cosmic, eternal scale. First, the Redeemer must be a near relative. Jesus fulfills this through the incarnation.
Right.
He became human, taking on flesh and blood, to be our brother, to have the right to redeem us.
Exactly. He is qualified and willing. He is divine, possessing the power and the purity to actually save, and he willingly laid down his life. He didn't back out like the near relative when he saw the cost.
No.
And he paid the ultimate price, not with silver or land, but with his own life on the cross. He absorbed our emptiness, our debt, our sin, right into himself.
And just like Boaz restored the land to Naomi, Jesus restores our eternal inheritance. He buys back what was lost in the fall and brings his people home. It is exactly what Boaz did for Ruth and Naomi, but amplified to eternity.
And the narrative continues right into the present day, with the church, judgment, and new creation.
Right. The sources argue that the church is meant to reflect this redemptive reality in the here and now. Think about Ruth. She was a Moabite, a foreigner, an outsider from an enemy nation. But she was welcomed and brought near by the grace of Boaz. In the same way, the church is supposed to be a redeemed community that welcomes outsiders and protects the vulnerable. Belonging in this community is strictly by covenant mercy, not by ethnic pride, class status, or, personal achievement.
Furthermore, the goal concept carries the profound gravity of justice. Redemption always implies that something went horribly wrong, a debt was incurred, a life was lost, and it requires judgment. A price must be paid to balance the scales.
Right.
The Christian claim is that Christ bears that judgment, that cost on the cross.
Leading us ultimately to a fully restored new creation where God dwells with his people forever, a full restoration, no more loss, no more tears, no more famine. The redeemed inherit the earth not as fragile, traumatized survivors, but as glorified children with a secure inheritance.
It's just incredible.
When you pull back and look at it, from a dusty threshing floor in Bethlehem to the renewal of the entire cosmos, it's breathtaking.
It truly is. It's a masterpiece of narrative theology. But because this story is so rich, so deeply layered, it's also frequently misunderstood. Our sources spend some time busting common myths and highlighting the dangers we need to avoid when interpreting this text.
Let's dig into a few of these modern misconceptions, and I want to debate them based on the text. Myth number one, which we touched on earlier, redemption is just a financial metaphor.
Yeah, that's a complete misreading of the ancient context. The sources make clear it is radically holistic. Yes, it involves land and economics, but it is inextricably tied to lineage, marriage, physical protection, personal identity, and securing a future.
It's so much more than money.
It is not an abstract accounting problem.
Yeah.
It is embodied, physical, relational grace. If you reduce it to just a financial transaction, you completely miss the heartbeat of Hesed.
Okay, myth number 2. Boaz is just a really nice guy.
Calling Boaz nice completely trivializes what he did. He is covenantally righteous. His actions reflect the fierce, protective character of God. He operates within the bounds of the law, but he infuses it with profound integrity and generosity. He isn't just nice. He is a powerful, active agent of structural and personal restoration in a society that was literally falling apart.
Okay, here is myth number 3, and I think this is by far the most common one, especially in Western culture. The Book of Ruth is primarily a romance story. We read it like an ancient rom-com. Boy meets girl in a barley field, there's a little drama with a rival suitor at the gate, and they live happily ever after.
People love to read it that way, and there is certainly affection there. But the sources insist that we have the order backwards. Romance serves redemption, not the other way around.
Right.
We impose our highly individualized 21st century romantic lens onto an ancient survival story. The core driving force of the story isn't finding a soulmate. It is covenant mercy, fulfilling legal obligation, preserving a dead man's family line, and advancing the promises of God.
That is so important. The marriage is the mechanism of redemption, not just a romantic happy ending. Okay, myth number 4. The Goel is an outdated concept only for ancient Israel. It has no bearing on us today.
Well, the specific legal form like marrying your brother's widow or buying back family land certainly belongs to the agrarian society of ancient Israel.
Sure.
But the theological pattern points directly forward to Christ and forms the vocabulary of the New Testament. The New Testament constantly uses the language of redemption, ransom, adoption, and inheritance to explain salvation. You literally cannot understand what Paul means by redemption in the New Testament if you don't understand the Goel in the Old Testament.
And the final myth, which might be the most dangerous one for how we live our lives today. Redemption means the absence of suffering or cost. We think if we are redeemed, everything should just be easy.
The story of Ruth teaches the exact opposite. Redemption requires loss, risk, and immense commitment. Naomi had to endure the agonizing grief of widowhood and starvation. Ruth had to risk leaving everything she knew, gleaning in dangerous fields, and proposing to a man on a threshing floor. Boaz had to risk his wealth and reputation. Redemption doesn't deny pain. It doesn't pretend the famine never happened. It takes that pain and transforms it into something life-giving.
It transforms it. That is a powerful distinction. It doesn't erase the scars, it repurposes them. Now, the infographics also list specific dangers to avoid, drawing directly from the chaotic backdrop of the Judges era and how those dangers still apply today.
Yes, these are the cultural pitfalls that create the need for redemption in the first place. The first is religious apathy, just like Israel forgetting God and doing what was right in their own eyes.
Right.
The second is self-reliance, relying entirely on our own strength or wealth instead of leaning on the covenant community, which is what Elimelech arguably did when he fled to Moab instead of trusting God in Bethlehem.
Then there is compromise blending with the surrounding pagan world, ignoring God's ethical standards for convenience. Bitterness, losing hope in God's goodness, which Naomi almost completely succumbed to when she demanded to be called Mara.
Yeah.
And finally, unfaithful leadership using power for self-preservation instead of protecting others, exactly like the flawed judges or the unnamed near relative who only cared about his own estate.
These dangers are the exact opposites of the Hesed and faithfulness we see in Boaz and Ruth. When a society embraces those dangers, it fractures. When individuals embrace Hesed, it heals.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We've covered ancient land laws, genealogical timelines, theological typologies, and cosmic theology. Let's bring it down to the ground. What are the practical implications for your daily life?
The sources offer incredibly rich applications here. First, for the Christian life and our daily walking around. The story of Ruth teaches us to ruthlessly trust God's providence in seasons that feel entirely empty and bitter.
Think about Naomi's perspective. When she told Ruth to glean, she couldn't see God quietly placing Boaz in that specific field at that exact time.
Right.
She just saw empty fields, empty arms, and a desperate need for a meal. She had no idea a multi-generational legacy was starting that afternoon.
Exactly. God works through the small, uncelebrated, deeply ordinary moments of faithfulness. A meal shared with a foreigner, a quiet legal conversation at a city gate, a farmer checking in on his workers, a daughter-in-law refusing to take the easy way out.
Yeah.
The text says God works through ordinary faithfulness. In our culture, we want the spectacular, right? The miraculous signs from heaven. But we shouldn't despise the ordinary, mundane moments of obedience because they are the very theater where God stages his redemption.
What about for discipleship and ministry? How does this ancient story shape how we build communities?
The core lesson is that belonging is by grace, not achievement. Ruth achieved nothing to earn her place in the lineage of David. She was an impoverished Moabite widow who was brought in entirely by covenant mercy. Therefore, our communities, our churches, our ministries must be places that actively protect the vulnerable, welcome the outsider, and operate with generosity and dignity. We have to stop acting like the nearer relative, guarding our assets, and start cultivating hehezed, loyal, costly love, especially when it's inconvenient.
And for leadership, we see a lot of toxic leadership models today in business and politics, and unfortunately in the church. Leaders who extract value, who use people as stepping stones. How does the goal apply here?
The imperative is devastatingly simple. Be a Boaz. If you have any kind of authority, wealth, or resources, you're required to use them to shield and restore others. Period.
Wow.
Never use your power to extract value from the weak. Never do charitable acts just for the optics or for personal gain. True biblical leadership pays the cost for the good of others. It acts with total integrity and transparency, even when it hurts the bottom line.
Use your strength as a shield. I love that. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started in the absolute devastation and famine of Moab, tracing the grief of two deeply vulnerable widows walking a dusty road back to a town where they had nothing.
We explored the incredible, intricate legal and moral architecture of the Goel, the kinsman-redeemer who perfectly combines the right by blood, the relationship by proximity, and the heavy responsibility to save.
We saw how Boaz stepped up at the city gates, rejecting the selfish financial calculus of his peers and embodying the costly, sacrificial love of his head. He restored an inheritance and secured a future.
And we saw how God used those quiet, seemingly insignificant acts of faithfulness to write redemption into the story of a family leading to King David, and ultimately to the story of the entire world through Jesus Christ, the ultimate kinsman-redeemer. The sources leave us with a deeply moving summary of this entire journey, and I think it perfectly captures the heart of the text. It says, the final word is not famine, not widowhood, not exile, not bitterness. The final word is redemption.
The final word is redemption. I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Throughout this entire story, massive cosmic redemption hinged on incredibly mundane, everyday actions. A grieving woman deciding to walk down a road with her mother-in-law. A wealthy farmer deciding to actually check in on the vulnerable people gleaning in his fields. If God uses ordinary, uncelebrated faithfulness to orchestrate a multi-generational legacy that changes the entire world, what seemingly mundane action, what quiet conversation, or what difficult act of loyal hesed in your life right now might be the seed of a legacy you cannot yet see?
It really changes how you view every single interaction you have today.
It really does. Keep digging deep, keep asking questions, and keep looking for the hesed in the ordinary. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.